But I'm the one Father chose.
So that's why you're so obsessed with Big Boss. Some warped kind of love.
Love? It's hate! He always told me I was inferior, and now I'll have my revenge!
Did Liquid Snake meet Big Boss?
Kept you waiting, huh?
You know, the guy who practically saved the entire world on more than one occasion, and is the most punk rock anti-establishment enigma going? If there's a battlefield, you're certain Big Boss is going to be there. It's like his ultimate hobby. And he did most of these amazing things whilst having no eye, ironically thanks to his best mate, who has a funny way of showing friendship. I don't know about you, but I like to play games with my friends and not try to kill them. But hey, it's all part of the camaraderie, right? Oh, and not to mention that epic mullet that no one can replicate as good as Big Boss. It's the OG hairstyle that even his sons can't match. Kurt Russell comes pretty close, but it ain't shit on Big Boss. Man, who's his barber? I need to get in touch with him. Anyway, let's get back on topic. In MGS1, Liquid Snake's dialogue signifies that Big Boss told him he was always inferior. Well, it's understandable, since he is always such a little shit. Alright, even I have to admit it's terrible parenting, but maybe locking him in his room definitely could have worked. But it's that statement right there.
He always told me I was inferior.
That leads us to believe somewhere in the timeline, Liquid did indeed meet his father, and not just Venom Snake. So in 1972, Liquid was born thanks to something we all know as Les Enfants Terribles.
Les enfants terribles.
If you're not a fan of the French, it means the terrible children.
What's up? About the 1972 project. Les Enfants Terribles. You never did like the French. All that Catherine the Great aristocratic pompousness gets to me, that's all. Palace talk, they can keep it. Les Enfants Terribles. The terrible children.
The project was designed to create the perfect soldier of the 21st century, just like Big Boss. It's in 1974 that Zero planned to use the sons of Big Boss as an insurance policy against him, which ironically would backfire. That's some terrible insurance policy if you ask me. So when the project was abandoned in 1976, by the way, it's important that we keep on the timeline to find out how Liquid could have met Big Boss. Liquid was taken to Zero's homeland in England, most likely Exeter, where Zero was born. It's right near the coast, and I always did like the beaches down south. So in 1979, Liquid decided to take a little trip to Africa, escaping his handlers in Cypher. During this time, Grey Fox was in Rhodesia, and because of MGS5's retcon, Big Boss was still in a coma, unless in your own headcanon believe he woke up earlier. It's not stated whereabouts in Africa Liquid first went to, or if he even travelled around. All we really know is that he attacked several villages with other child soldiers. Now, hypothetically, what if Liquid ran into the real Big Boss somewhere in the 1980s in Mozambique, where Big Boss would meet Grey Fox and Naomi and take them to the States? It most likely could have been when Liquid Snake asked his father behind the truth of his birth and seeking some validation as a son, for then Big Boss to call him inferior, knowing that he was a creation of Zero's plans. And, well, really resented the idea of the projects, as he even states they are no sons of his. In the truth tapes, this is where it defeats the theory, as Ocelot explains to Big Boss about Liquid's whereabouts and some background information, since Big Boss doesn't seem to know a great deal. It's more than likely that Cypher planted the hatred inside Liquid's mind. After all, he is an insurance policy against Big Boss, so Cypher could have fed him a load of lies or information that was suitable to them to make him hate Big Boss the way that he does. In the truth tapes, there's nothing in the dialogue to suggest Big Boss has never met him before, but it hints at the idea that he most likely doesn't have much of an idea about him. The truth tape was recorded in 1984, so it's most likely he took Frank to the States later in the 80s, since Liquid was preoccupied with the Phantom at that time, who genuinely believed it was the real Big Boss. Because if Liquid met the real Big Boss, he would have most likely have known Venom's a phony given on the shrapnel in his head and a few noticeable differences that destroys his theory.
Your sons.
They're no sons of mine. And they're sure as hell not me.
Just a bunch of cells grown in a lab.
What they are is much sicker than that.
The other, Eli, has disappeared. Might as well call it abandoned. They're through with him.
Where is he?
He was in England, Zero's home ground. Apparently he traveled to Africa after that, but That's where he escaped from Zero's care.
Just like that. Why?
Who knows? Maybe he found out about his birth.
So he might still be alive.
On his own, there? I wouldn't bet on it. John, if he is alive, what's the plan?
I have nothing to say to him. Treat him like a human being, just another person.
So a lot of Liquid's hatred to Big Boss seems to stem from something, and if Liquid has never met Big Boss apart from the Phantom, where is all this hatred coming from? Like I said, it's most likely fueled by Cypher, including those magic words. He always told me I was inferior. Perhaps something Zero told him. It's tragic because you can see Venom legitimately wants to be a father figure to Liquid, but cannot reach him. But the third chapter confirms his hatred for Big Boss, and his belief that Venom is that one and only.
All because of you! I'm not me. I'm just a copy of you. I will surpass my father. Destroy my father.
So in the 1990s, Liquid Snake joined the British Special Air Service whilst Big Boss returned to the US to resume command of Foxhound. So they couldn't have possibly met each other at this time. This was all whilst he secretly built his private military unit into a larger military establishment, with Venom Snake acting as his stead. And during the Gulf War in Iraq, Liquid was assigned to the SAS unit to track down and destroy mobile Scud missiles. In truth, he infiltrated the Middle East as a sleeper agent for the British Secret Intelligence Service, but was later captured by the Iraqis, becoming a prisoner of war, and was later rescued by the US government in 1994. Solid Snake also fought during the Gulf War when he was a part of the Green Berets, and actually joined Foxhound in 1995. It's unclear what Liquid was doing during that year, and whenever he actually got in contact with Foxhound and had some sort of secret involvement within it.
But I'm the one Father chose.
So that's why you're so obsessed with Big Boss. Some warped kind of love.
Ha! Love? It's hate. His choosing me knowingly to be the inferior one? For this, I want revenge. You don't even understand this. You who could kill your own real father.
As you guys can notice, the dialogue is different in Twin Snakes compared to the PS1 version, where Liquid says he has always told me I was inferior, implying that the boss himself actually said this to Liquid. Whereas as in Twin Snakes, he says he's choosing me knowingly to be the inferior one. It really does raise a lot more questions than it does answers. Is Liquid Snake just completely delusional and just that much full of rage that it's clouding his judgment? Or was this something that perhaps Venom Snake told him? Although it does seem highly unlikely given on how much of a positive attitude and much of a great message that Venom was trying to install into Liquid.
Anyone here can use a knife or a gun. What you're gonna learn is how to use your head.
Let's move.
When you get that under your belt, then you're free to leave.
We know that in Foxhound, Big Boss personally trained Solid Snake in the art of CQC and many combat skills, and in official sources it is implied that Big Boss knew David was one of his sons, which does make sense since it was confirmed in MGS5.
The first boys were raised free range, like we thought. Both of them. David has never left the States.
Hey Snake, since when did you learn how to use CQC?
I got the training back when I was in Foxhound, but I never used it in actual combat.
You had those skills all this time and never used them? Why?
The man who taught me was my former commander in Foxhound.
Big Boss?
Never felt right using a technique learned from a man who betrayed his unit.
Which leads me onto another question. Where did Eli learn all of his fighting skills? I know he's not exactly a CQC tactician, but someone must have taught him fighting skills, Legendary Soldier's son or not. I mean, he gets his ass beat by Venom and Ocelot, but that's a given, they're masters at the fighting craft. CQC was going into circulation during Portable Ops and Peace Walker. Other soldiers around the world were starting to become familiar with this particular fighting style. There were a lot of military fighters that were all around the world that tried to replicate this style, but they were just cheap imitations. After all, those who learn from the boss himself are always well versed in the skill. For instance, Diamond Dogs are taught by Venom, one of Big Boss's greatest soldiers, and yet Eli makes short work of one. If you ask me guys, I think Liquid's development story deserves so much more detail than it got. Heck, even Solidus got more of an in-depth storyline.
I'm not a kid. You hear me?
So it's stated that Liquid Snake joined Foxhound circa the early 2000s and became the squadron leader after Solid Snake had left alongside Colonel Campbell pretty much after the Zanzibar disturbance. What always quizzed my mind is when Liquid says, "I'm the one Father chose."
But I'm the one Father chose.
Now what I'm going to explain is just based on some theory that I and some others in the MGS community have speculated. Just call it a little piece of fan canon based on these statements, since we can't really call it official. That during that early 1995, before the Outer Heaven uprising, Liquid was already a part of Foxhound, once he had been rescued by the US, and was kept in a secretive sector opposite to the one Solid Snake and Grey Fox served in. Of course, all Big Boss is doing. That Liquid alongside the other members like Raven, Sniper Wolf, which by the way was rescued by Big Boss, Psycho Mantis and Decoy Octopus, was a part of Big Boss's secret task force. Since Big Boss knew his sons wore an insurance policy to be used against him by Zero, he was most likely aware that Solid Snake was well under the Patriots' control at the time. Unlike his other son Liquid, who ran away from Cypher after discovering the truth about his past, Big Boss realises that he could use the insurance policy that was used against him to use it back at Cypher. Of course, after Outer Heaven began to gain too much attention, his main attention wasn't on Liquid, who he knew also hated him at some point would want to settle the score with him, since Solid Snake was tasked to expose his military nation, was now the current threat. After Venom Snake was defeated, being the cover for Big Boss, who managed to go into hiding until the Zanzibar disturbance, where once again the agent of the Patriots at the time, Solid Snake, would defeat him, hence him being placed in a comatose state by the said organisation. I like to think somewhere along the lines that Big Boss explains to Liquid that he was the inferior clone. Not out of spite, but just out of misinformation that I think Ocelot got wrong at the time. Either that or he really did say it out of being spiteful, because let's face it, during the MSX games he was quite an evil bastard. That Liquid took it the wrong way, and Big Boss had his intention more on Solid Snake throughout his career in Foxhound, which caused Liquid to resent his brother and his father. And well, to state the obvious, Liquid didn't exactly get the revenge that he wanted to extract in the Zanzibar disturbance. If we listen to the conversation at the end of MGS1, we can hear Ocelot tell Solidus that Liquid Snake was actually the dominant clone all along. And we can't forget that Ocelot was an insider for the Patriots and would be relaying information to Big Boss all the time, and would be trying to plan ahead, in case the Patriots learn of Big Boss's attempt to thwart their immense power and control.
Yes, the inferior one was the winner after all. That's right. Until the very end, Liquid thought he was the inferior one.
That ending call is very profound, like many of the others within the series, which usually has Ocelot on the ending call. In the regards to MGS1, it's not just because how we learned that the third son was called Solidus, but because it appears that Ocelot may have knew all along that Liquid was always the superior clone, and no doubt would have informed Big Boss prior to Outer Heaven uprising, because Big Boss was so confident and was really convinced that Solid Snake was not going to complete his mission, because maybe someone told him that he was the inferior one, and that really ultimately Venom would defeat him. And now the statement of "Father chose me" makes more sense, because Big Boss knew that Liquid was a superior clone thanks to Ocelot letting him know, but alongside Ocelot had fed into his hatred to use it to combat Cypher, since Big Boss didn't really give a shit about his sons at the time, knew that he could use Liquid as a weapon. And with Ocelot being the master manipulator, he even states in MGS5 to Miller that when the day comes if he ever goes back to Cypher, he would aid the other son, which of course we would know to be Liquid, who isn't a Patriot pawn.
If the day ever comes that you go back to Cypher, I'll aid the other son. And then you and I will be enemies too.
And it was in February 2005, Liquid Snake was convinced by Foxhound subordinate Ocelot in the first place to launch an insurrection against the US government. Ocelot always knew the end game, and he just about double-crossed everyone and played the long game, as his goals were to revive Big Boss, who was still comatose by the Patriots. It's highly likely that Ocelot introduced Liquid into Big Boss's fold in the first place, where they were using Liquid as they saw fit. It was also in Shadow Moses in the incident itself, with the list of demands being Big Boss's body, which was an objective of Ocelot's and a few others all along. Of course, Liquid's goals wouldn't align with the likes of Ocelot, because Ocelot wanted to save Big Boss, and Liquid wanted to surpass him and destroy him if he had the chance. He was just a stepping stone for Ocelot to try and retrieve Big Boss.
Naturally, Ocelot and I planned to free him from Zero's prison. We enlisted Naomi Hunter, an authority in the field of nanomachine research, into our organization. And we used Frank Yeager to kill Dr. Clark. Ocelot tortured the DARPA chief, Donald Anderson, also known as SIGINT, to death, and made it look like an accident.
The Shadow Moses incident.
With Paramedic and SIGINT dead, Zero was the only one left.
So it's really unclear to say when or how did Liquid even meet Big Boss, considering it's not officially confirmed. And we're just going off his statements, which awfully reminds me of MGS5 when it comes to looking for answers. Sometimes we just reach a dead end, or a narrative we choose to believe, or a convenient truth. But one thing is very clear, Liquid seemed to understand Big Boss's dream quite well, and even wanted to revive out of heaven and finish what Big Boss could not, and bring around a place where warriors are once needed again, very similar to Big Boss's vision.
War isn't what it used to be. We're losing our place in a world that no longer needs us. A world that now spurns our very existence. You should know that as well as I do. After I launch this weapon and get our $1 billion, we'll be able to bring chaos and honor back to this world gone soft. Conflict will breed conflict. New hatreds will arise. Then we'll steadily expand our sphere of influence.
But as long as there are people, there will always be war.
But the problem is balance. Father knew what type of a balance was best.
Is that the only reason?
Isn't it reason enough?
So the answer to the question is for you to decide. Maybe Liquid believes that's what Big Boss would say, that he is inferior, or maybe it was told to him by Cypher. It's disappointing that MGS5 couldn't deliver and expanded onto some of the more important aspects that tied in with the story just a little bit before the MSX games, such as Big Boss meeting Grey Fox and other essential pieces that could have made the dialogue make sense in Metal Gear Solid 1. Overall though, Metal Gear Solid 5 was a great game. I loved the experience, but it didn't really reach up to the pinnacle of the rest of the Metal Gear games in the series. But with that being said, thank you for watching guys. Leave me some comments down below if you think Liquid met Big Boss or not, and like the video. And if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I'm the VoiceBox, and until we meet again.